Thank you. All right, so I'd like to talk to the kids now. So I have a really good story to tell you today. I want to start with a question, though. Do you guys ever go on the TTC? Okay, what color are the streetcars on the TTC? On the outside? Red, exactly. They're red, right? And they look like this. So this is what streetcars used to look like. They used to be red and yellow. And do you know why they're red and yellow? It's a really interesting story. They're red and yellow because of these two people, Lucie and Thornton Blackburn. They lived here in Toronto back in the 1830s. That's a long time ago. That's about 200 years ago. And they came here, and at a time when Toronto was just a small town, really, really small. And you know what? The roads weren't paved. The roads were just mud. They were just dirt. So in the summer it was okay when you were traveling. But this is a messy city with all the snow and the rain. So the streets often turned to mud, right? And as a result, back then they called this town Muddy York. Like everybody knew the town as, oh yeah, that's that place with all the mud. And Thornton had a job at a place called Osgoode Hall, which is still down there. And there's some lovely trees at Osgoode Hall, which we all hope will stay. Anyway, I digress. But he had a job as a waiter at Osgoode Hall. And he had to walk from his house, which was near the Don River. And he had to walk through all this mud, and he got really frustrated by it. He said, you know what, I don't like this. I think it would be better if there was a way for a person to get a ride through this city so they wouldn't have to get their feet all muddy. So some people already had horses and carriages that they owned, but he said there should be a way to do this so that even if you don't have your horse with you, you could still get a ride. So he went to a friend and he said, I want you to build me one of these. And this is what he built. He had this built. It was a horse that pulled a carriage, and it was the first taxi cab in Toronto. He was the father, he and Lucie were the father and mother of all taxi cabs in Toronto. And he wanted people to see it and it to stand out so that they would go, hey, I need a taxi. So he had it painted yellow and red so it would really, really stand out. Now, that picture that I just showed you was made up. I asked an AI to make it. But there's one picture that's real of his cab. So this is a picture of King Street. Okay, can we take off the subtitles in here for a second, please? Yeah, okay. So this is King Street back in the 1830s. And now let's go to a close-up. See that yellow carriage? That's his taxi cab. That's Lucie and Thornton's taxi cab. So, and they were famous. Everybody knew that that was their cab because it was the only yellow carriage on the streets of Toronto. And pretty soon, lots of people were saying, that's a really good idea. We should do that too. So taxi cabs started to proliferate. Now, Thornton and Lucie made a fair bit of money from their taxi cab company, and they started buying properties, and they made more money. And you know what? They used that money to help people, because Thornton and Lucie weren't born here. Thornton and Lucie were born in the United States, in Kentucky, at a time when they were born into slavery. They had been slaves. They were born and considered the property of a white man who ran a big farm called a plantation. And they didn't like it very much. And so when they grew up, Thornton was 21 and Lucie was 26. They were a couple and they ran away together. And they escaped and they risked their lives to leave Kentucky so that they could come north. And they got to Detroit, stayed for a couple of years, and then came to Canada. And then you know what happened? The guy who thought that he owned them said, I want them back. And he said, you better send them back, Canada, because they're my property. And just a year or two before, some guys called Osgoode and Strawn had passed a law that said if the Americans want somebody back to go to trial, whatever happens to them in the United States can't be worse than what would happen to them in Canada. And so the Canadians looked at it and said, if we send Thornton and Lucie back, even if they're found innocent of any crimes they may have committed, they'll still have to go back into slavery. And that's worse than what would happen here in Canada, so we're keeping them. And so Thornton and Lucie got to stay, and it was the very first case that was, it was the very first test trial of this new law, and it kept lots of escaped slaves here in Canada. And so they were able to start their cab business, And it was so successful that people got used to thinking of a cab as something that was red and yellow. So when the Toronto Transit Commission was started in 1921, they decided the colors of the TTC would be red and yellow. And so anytime you hail a cab, anytime you get on the TTC, you can thank a black couple from a long time ago who started the first cab company in Toronto. That's my story for you today.